Uh, and let's see here. Okay, so now we got away into the novel here, and we have some keywords that I think are helpful for reading this novel that we can talk about today, and talk a little bit about the novel as well. And then next week we'll finish it up and move on to the midterm a week from, let's see, a week from next Tuesday, right? So we have a week and a half until the midterm exam. Multiple choice. So there's a crew of people that are here all the time. I recognize all of you. I'm sure that the people in the room here are going to be, most of the preparation is done by just attending and taking notes and paying attention. But of course, I urge you to, study and review as well. So the problem, is I always lower expectations, I think, by saying, if you're here, whatever, they should really raise them, right? So that you're like all ready and nervous and freaked out, and then you do well on the exam, right? So you realize when you're standing behind the lectern that it's about expectations, right? You gotta say the opposite thing in a way to get people to do the thing that you want them to do. So that's here. So okay. So the two words today are body and pain, and I want to just make a point like why those words. It should be obvious. This is the part of the novel that involves this rape by Bierman, and then Solander's kind of vengeance on him. So there's obviously it's about kind of body politics and what people do to each other. That are more than obviously more than just physical acts, but thinking that there, of course, it has to do with kind of terrorism, violence, and so forth. So the idea here is that we can think a little bit about those background concepts as a way of opening up what's happening in the novel. One of the things we've done in the course so far is emphasize more genre and kind of narrative style and organization and so forth. This is a chance to take a little bit different approach to these topics. And so in looking at the terms, I hope they'll leave us with something for that'll help us deal with the material in this part of the novel. Okay. So we start with body. Body's like a term. Body's a term that has been, it's like very, very fashionable. It was a very fashionable term, I think, probably the last 20 years or so in literary studies, part because literature and people talking about culture, they tend to think of it as a sort of a mind thing, right? The way that it's about rationality and about emotions, but not about necessarily bodies. And there's been a lot of people who've tried to correct that by steering things back and saying, well, culture shapes bodies in particular ways, what we think about them and how we produce them, and so it's very important to understand the way that works. And as a result, there's been a lot of people who've written a lot about bodies and the way that culture inscribes them. For example, one of the ways you can think about that is think about your relationship to, say, medicine, right? When you tell a doctor or something about your body, right? What are you doing? You're of course using words to shape the way in which you're perceived, and also producing yourself, right? You're creating a version of yourself that can be examined and then sort of fixed and so forth. That there's a way in which words and bodies relate. So this is kind of where we're in the background here. Of course, the reason for thinking about it in this novel is that it's about bodies, right? Solander, we can think about the title, right? In English, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. It's about, a young woman's body in that sense, the way that the novel frames the whole thing. And so I think and then of course, as we can talk about in discussing the novel, bodies are in the foreground here, right? Whether it's tattoos or whether it's these violent acts against bodies and so forth. So that's the reason for choosing this term. The second term, pain, obviously is relevant as well, since inflicting pain upon others is at the center of what we read for today. And actually, there's been both in American public culture and as a consequence around the world, a lot of discussion of pain in the last 10, 15 years now because of the events of 9/11 and then the sort of U.S. policy following that, which of course involved so-called extreme rendition or torture of people who were suspected of terrorist activities, and that put the issue of torture back into debate. So that's one reason that pain has been a focus, and maybe this novel, published in English in 2008, speaks to people's thoughts about that kind of thing. I don't know. This isn't. I mean, obviously, the stuff we read for today, it's about torture, right? So that's there. The other thing is, of course, with pain is that it goes back much further. When one thinks of torture in general and experiences of physical pain. And there's some really interesting writing about that. And I just chose a section of the most famous book on pain, which is a book called The Body and Pain by a philosopher, Elaine Scarry, who's still working today. But that book was published in 1978, and it's kind of like one of the main statements on pain. So I thought we could talk about that just as a way to talk a little bit more about, since I asked you to read this brief excerpt from the introduction to that book, talk a little bit about that excerpt and talk about the keyword as well. And then I hope that gives us some concepts that we can bring to the novel in the second part of the discussion today. So let me blow this up a little bit here. And our first term then was body. And right, body, it's got this like notion of oh, wrong. What's going on there? Oh, there we go. Move that window, huh? Body, it's got like some kind of almost echo of the corpse, right? Where it's like the body, is a body alive? I mean, when we think of the body, it's almost something that it's a physical object as opposed to like my body, right? And how I move through the world and so forth. So maybe just a place to start is as we kind of our method, just begin by thinking about that term. What do we mean by bodies? Remember, people? Did anyone go see a couple years ago? There was this exhibit, Bodies, down. I think it was at Pacific Science Center. Anyone see that? What was that like? James, sitting in the front.
It was pretty interesting.
If you don't mind my calling on you.
Like that, honestly.
Yeah.
Like it's just like muscles and everything.
Yeah.
It was really cool to learn, actually.
Yeah.
Some of the things that
Yeah. When you say it's muscles and things like that, what was your experience of looking at that? I mean, what did it ask you to? How did it ask you to relate to those objects that it displayed? Do you think?
I didn't think about
out of curiosity or just?
I just went because I thought it would be interesting to see.
Yeah.
Again, like it's just unreal to see. Like,
yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's underneath like all this skin.
Yeah.
It's like
yeah.
Best way to put it. But I like how they displayed everything.
Okay. Okay. So it's a display of the internals of the body. So yeah, I mean, it's something we obviously is out there in the culture. But when we think about the body, what do we tend to think about? Or what do you think about? Anyone? Yeah, Sean?
Just to add on to that, though, there was a lot of controversy.
Right. What was the controversy?
They said that a lot of the bodies were like taken from like prisons in I think China.
Right.
The body, like the people didn't actually approve or give approval of their bodies to them.
Exactly. So that there's a notion of the proprietary status of the body, that it's not, in a way, right, when in that display, it's like Da Vinci, right, the body as this kind of universal object of interest. We all have one, right, in the world. They're different in their ways, and yet there's a notion of universality, of similarity, right, among them. And yet at the same time, they're ours, right, in a very sort of individual way, private way, one might say, depending on privacy is obviously a different kind of concept than that. And so, yours, right, you should have some control over it, and if it's gone, it's dead, that doesn't mean that that it can just be sort of trotted out and displayed for everyone to see. So there's a controversy there in terms of, whose is it, who has control over it, right? And moreover, what can be done with it. This is maybe people have followed as well. There's this very interesting controversy about the body of this woman, Henrietta Lacks, who was without permission, some of her DNA was taken. It's been like a line of genes that have been used extensively in medical research, and so there's been great findings from that. At the same time as it was taken without her permission, she was an African-American woman who was, really not treated well by the people who took those samples, and so, the history of race in the United States, all these kinds of things that are part of American culture, American history, then kind of figure in the way that her body was treated, and the family has tried for years to get back control over of her genetic heritage, her body, and only recently it's been back in the news, or books have been written about her, and there's been some changes. But do you want to add, Sean?
Interestingly, though, we still use it a lot in the research because I was actually asking around in Fred Hutch that I work at, and I asked the researchers, do we actually use HeLa cells here? And they're like, yeah, we use it all the time. And so it's a constant reminder that we always...
Do you want to walk us through what you mean by that?
So her cells were, we use her cell line, and so you can always regrow those cells, and technically we can use it for a lot of different experiments. And so you can use it for almost any type of experiment because her cells just keep growing. You can use it after each generation. And so we have almost every lab has another set of HeLa cells. So certain labs, if they don't have it, they'll ask for another lab to give it to them.
Okay.
And so it just spread everywhere.
Right. So if I understand right, that from her genetic heritage, they've been able to produce these cell lines that are commonly used in various kinds of medical research around the country. That's right. So that the body, right? Whose is it? Who does that belong to? Medical science, right? Or this individual person. So these are just issues that are out there, and I'm not an expert on them, but you can see the reason for raising them is to think right away, okay, well, what about Solander, right? This is the body is just forced on us here. In the storytelling, right, here she is, 4'10", tattooed, whatever, in the conflicts in the story, this horrible rape that she experiences in the novel, and then, right, where does she get her vengeance? Like a counterattack, right, where she attacks the body of Bjurman, right? That's where she sort of exacts her revenge. So this is one of the reasons why we can think about the body. Other associations of thoughts that might be relevant to the novel and thinking about the body? Maybe we'll turn to the keywords, as I see a lot of people kind of looking like, what are you talking about? One of the things I wanted to say here was, we can kind of break the body up into different ways of thinking about it, and this is, I think, helpful for thinking about the body in the novel here. One is the phenomenal body, and one is sort of the physiological body, where we think of the physiological body as that kind of universal body that we all have. You have to have a heart, and you have to have a brain that functions in order to live, and there's these sorts of parts that have to be there. Now, of course, there are different kinds of bodies and different arrangements and so forth, and for almost any universal that you point to, you can talk about some kind of exception, but nevertheless, there's a sort of an objective body, this physiological body. And then, right, there's the phenomenal body, your body, that each is unique to the person it houses, right? And that way, you give meaning to your body, whether that's through the way your posture or the way the motions you project with your body, up to if you piercings or tattoos or whatever. There's many different ways in which we inscribe the body with some sort of personal version of meaning. And of course, that's not just our culture today, right? But rites of passage in all cultures shape the body in different ways, whether that's through kinds of practices of, say, circumcision, or whether that's through, markings of the body, all these kinds of things that go deeply back into history as means of marking belonging or marking different kinds of status of the body, right? The kin groups and family groups and so forth. And so one thing we could say is that, well, we have, yeah, did you want to, Gabrielle, go ahead.
Well, no, something that you just said just reminded me, I don't know if this is like the best for just body, but kind of in relation to body and pain. I read an article a while ago that talks about body in relation to pain and how there are like 3 main types of bodies that affect a person's suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like the individual body, the social body, and the political body,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's kind of like a top-down effect, like how a person is affected on the individual, like as an individual, based off of social bodies, and political bodies, and how that like comes down.
Yeah. So you can think that what does that mean to say an individual body, a social body, and a political body? You can think of it as social body. It's an interesting one. If we, in a way, that's what I'm calling the phenomenal body. Or I'm sorry, the individual body would be the phenomenal body, and that objective body would be something like the social body, right? The kind of the collective idea of a body. But you can think about, for example, say, what's a good instance? Depression. Everyone has probably felt blue sometime, right? Where you feel like you don't have any energy and you're kind of down or whatever, depressed about something or other. But are you depressed, right? And the thing is that then you ask yourself, right, as you're just like going over this in your head, is like, well, what's depression and how would I know? Or maybe you look it up online or you talk to a doctor or whatever, right? And the question is like, is that your body or is that some kind of social body that you're imposing on your body, right? Where then you look around and there's these messages, often like highly capitalized ones, advertising campaigns for different kinds of drugs and so forth, that say you can change that individual body if you become the social body, right? If you take those drugs or whatever. And the point is not to say the drugs are good or bad, but if you have a biochemical imbalance, that's what needs to be done, right? And that's why doctors prescribe those medications. But the point is that part of that process is correlating me, right, with that one out there, where there's this kind of like relationship. And of course, this is one of the things that is happening in the novel. Who is this girl, and how does she relate to woman, or some notion of the social body as violated or whatever? Because that's what this was the novel's about, right? It's very strong, as we pointed out last time, looking at these epigraphs. 18% of women in Sweden have been threatened by a man, right? It's like it wants to say to us that there's a lot of bodily violence out there, and it matters, and we should pay attention to it. And your body, too, is a part of it, right? So that correlating these different levels or matching them up in one way or another is part of the way in which the novel works. And that's why it's worth paying attention to these kinds of the categories of how we think about ourselves as embodied beings, how those things get played out in the novel. So one of the things that we can say here, right, is that there's this body out there that's a kind of a objective body, not your body, but the body, right, that can get worked over in different ways and oftentimes through symbolic actions linked to your personal sense of an embodied self. And so one of the ways of talking about this novel is just ask ourselves, what happens to these bodies and how are they sort of made significant in the novel, right? And that is through physical violence, right? There's a lot of that here. But also through the ways in which the characters respond to that physical violence. Of course, Solander, one of her responses is to both attack and sort of counterattack, or to be sort of suffer attacks and then counterattack, but also to like mark her body and mark other people's bodies with her various kinds of symbolic action, whether that's tattoos or whether that's sort of lashings or shootings or whatever the kinds of things that happen here. The other thing, of course, is that we see already in this part of the novel we read for today, right? There's all this symbolic action in this history of murder that's part of the novel as well. These sorts of ritualistic attacks that Mikael Blomkvist begins to discover in investigating Harriet Vonger's disappearance. So anyway, this is just to kind of try to lay out a few issues for thinking about the body, and we can turn to that more in the second half of the meeting. So then I wanted to turn to this issue of pain, and we'll use the reading a little bit to talk about that here. Let me start with the and again, to just be clear about why I've chosen this term, the novel spends a lot of time depicting pain, and as a result, it's relevant to ask ourselves, what happens when we talk about pain? Like, what are we talking about when we talk about pain? And so, filling in that some just ideas that are in the culture about that, I think, will help us understand the novel a little bit more critically. Elaine Scarry will start that from the body and pain and making and unmaking of the world. And one of the questions she asks is, how do people experience pain, and how do they talk about it to others, whether in writing or in speaking? And let's just begin with that as an open-ended question, and talk with people sitting next to you. Take a few minutes to talk with people sitting next to you about how do people experience pain, right? And you can identify different kinds of pain, or talk about a personal experience or an experience of someone that you know. But let's just try to open up the discussion by trying to inventory a little bit about how we talk about pain. So let's just take a couple minutes to do that, and then we'll talk about it as a class.
That's what there's subsections. Yeah. How does that happen? I'm not sitting there smiling and enjoying it. People do ritual scarification. But yeah, that's what I'm saying. Maybe he's say this, you anything that physically others like the worst. I think emotional will win. So let's say physical. I think that. I already know my emotional. No, that wasn't even the start for me. Talk about my first heartbreak. Come on, my first heartbreak. That was the most painful ever. Can be more intense, like in the just getting shot. I've heard I've never been shot. Initially, that's why I heard it just depends on oh well, when I woke up and had too many dreams, that's another pain.
I see how it comes down to it. Like, I've heard of this.
At this point,
Just mean the other way around.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying, I'm saying, can you not have, but if you have physical pain, you're emotional.
Let's say my sister. I think that would be. Why would I be feeling?
All right, let's talk a little bit about pain here. So what did you come up with? People, yeah, Hannah.
You said that there is physical and emotional.
Okay, so that's a pretty helpful place to start. Physical pain and emotional pain. What's the difference? Is there a difference? Yeah, Gabrielle.
Well, our group talked about how there is a difference, but they're very interconnected.
Okay.
You might start out with physical pain, but that could, like, I don't know, emotional pain could lead to emotional pain, or even vice versa.
Uh-huh.
It's like, if you're sad for a long enough time, or like physically upset about something
Right.
for a long enough time, that'll physically.
What we know about, for example, various kinds of psychosomatic illness, right, where hypertension, for example, where you feel like mentally under a lot of stress, it can have a physical sort of ramification for your body, right, and damage your body one way or another. So they're interconnected. Right away, the body, you can see like that mind-body distinction that we're so used to making is very difficult to make. Gard, I think you had your hand up next.
I was gonna say something like pretty much just what you said about like the connection between the physical and the mental.
Okay, so interconnected. I'll just put interconnected, physical, and mental, right? And it's in a way the example I gave was like one instance of the mental acting on the physical, right? But it can go the other way around, right? Where you reshape the body as a means of altering the mind, right? You can think of all kinds of examples of that. Plastic surgery, right? Where my chin has just bothered me forever, and finally get the money, and I make the change, right? And so these kinds of things. Or I could tell, like, I have like some little cyst on my back, and the doctor's like, "Are you gonna get that removed?" I'm like, I don't have the money I don't need plastic surgery on my back, right? But my wife's like, the thing looks horrible, but it's just not worth it to me, right? But I could change my perception of myself, by so that these are the kinds of we can go both ways, right? Emily.
Well, you can prevent similar experience from happening in the future.
Okay, I'm sorry, say it again. Prevent
Similar experience from happening in the future.
Okay, and how does that relate to pain?
Well, in the book,
Uh-huh.
the girl's dream had to, after what happened to her, like after she's using method to avoid similar experience.
Okay, so there's sort of ways of, I'll put, protect the body to protect the self in a way that taking kind of preventative action with respect to pain is a way of controlling oneself or making oneself a certain kind of self, right? So, acting against pain in a sense. Other notions of pain. Caitlin, I thought you had your head up.
Oh, well, in the way that physical and emotional pain are kind of mixed together is sort of the type of physical pain you're enduring changes how you feel about it, like what caused it. So, like, for instance, if I walked into a light pole and broke my nose, I'd be really embarrassed and physically hurt. But if someone punched me and broke my nose, I'd feel very differently about the situation. I mean, the context in which something happens changes a lot.
Okay, excellent observation that pain is not objective in the sense that it just exists. Our emotional relationship to it shapes the way in which we think of it. So that the pain that's a consequence of an accident is different in a sense from the pain that's the consequence of victimization, I think is part of what you said. And so, right? Pain, that we talk about pain in different ways based on the source of the cause of the pain, right? So this is highly relevant here. Ben.
So I was just going to bring up, in most cases, physical pain is caused first. That leads to emotional pain, and emotional pain is usually longer lasting. Just because you usually get over the physical pain or whatever, but then emotional pain can stay.
Okay, so physical pain leads to emotional pain. Yeah, so which can be longer lasting. So, in a sense, it's the mind in a way that of course, but and then when we say you could have physical pain that leads to emotional pain, and then that kind of redoubles, right? Where suddenly then you have new kinds of physical pain because of a lingering emotional thing, right? Where you kind of become troubled by it. Cameron.
Sometimes pain can be desirable.
Right, pain can be desirable, right?
Physically, if you're either for working out or the tattooing.
Right.
Emotionally, even grief is typically because of the fact that you care enough about a person to be affected by it emotionally.
Okay, so pain can be desirable. You mentioned both self-inflicted pain, right, and also grief experiences, right, where feeling a profound sense of loss and pain related to that loss can be a sense of, like, proof of your feelings to you, proof of how much you care, right? Christine?
Kind of the same as working out being intentional pain. It's a really good motivator. So, like, working out, you can get the pain, you feel better because of it, or every parent who hits their kid because they did something wrong is hoping that pain will stop them from doing it.
Right, so pain is proof, right? It's like I'm working out hard enough, right? No pain, no gain, right? How do I know I'm doing it right? It hurts, right? And so as a result, things are going to somehow get better. It's very interesting to look at the room when you say things like this because everyone's like asleep, and then all of a sudden, no pain, no gain, and like everyone's got this little perverse, little masochistic smile on their face. Like, I know that feeling, right? Where there's a sense we recognize that, right? That kind of pain is. I mean, what is that? Let's just stop for a second. What is the workout pain? Yeah, well, I mean, like, we know what it is physiologically, right? You push your muscles to the limit or something like that. But why is it a good or bad pain?
Your muscles are repairing itself.
I mean, yeah, there's a sense of, like, we know the physiological process that's involved that will then lead to some kind of change, right, in the physical body. Right? I mean, in one sense, that it's like, you could say it's about control, self-control, that I can push myself past that limit. I know I can, right? And for people who work out a lot, that's probably part of it, is that by practicing that self-control over and over and over again, like these repetitive motions or repetitive activities, you get to a point where you can say, I know I can do that. I'm going to go just a little bit harder this time, or a little bit farther this time, or a little bit faster, whatever it is. It's where that's a sense of, like, a profound sense of self-control that comes from that. That's kind of how I'm interpreting James' work. Are there other aspects there? Like, what's going on with that? I mean, because it doesn't have to be like working out, right? There can be all kinds of things you do to yourself that create those feelings. Elizabeth? I'm sorry. Sarah, right.
Yeah, and I like to say something too, that, I mean, like, there's conditions where people can experience pain, like, not only is it desirable, but it's useful, like, pain is your body's way of telling you that something's wrong.
Right. It's a signal, right? Like, just as it's the signal that I'm doing it right, it can also be a signal of other kinds of things. Like, it's a status. It's like a speedometer, right? That where you get a sense of where you are, and in a way that's a version of control. Michael, you had your hand up in the back.
I would say, like, other pain and, like, the working out, like, the point where it hurts, and then, like, spikes, and the endorphin kicks in, and then you're no longer hurt.
Right, so there's a sort of a euphoria that can be, or like mild euphoria people talk about with pain. That's that good pain, right? Where there's a sense of overcoming that rebounds into a sense of, like, presence, maybe. I mean, many people would say that pain is like a proof that you're alive, right? That I know I'm here, I know I'm in the moment because of this thing, right? Or, for example, if any of you have ever had a child or you're part of that kind of thing, right? That's like, people talk about, like, space getting smaller for women and women laboring, right? The world just comes down to this, right? And it's like it can be a profound feeling of like, it hasn't happened to me, right? But my sense is it can be a profound feeling of presence, right? You are in the moment. There is nothing but that moment, right? And this thing, which is like, it's a very funny thing to think about that. You know, when I say I haven't had that experience, can I understand that experience? This is the thing with pain, right? Can others can you talk about your pain in a way? I remember I have 2 kids, and I made the mistake of saying, "What this is like a cliche." You'll laugh when you hear it, but it's like, "Oh yeah, it's probably like running a marathon or something like that." Like the last part, like it's like the worst thing to say, right? Because it trivializes the pain when you try to compare. And we've all had that experience, right? Where if you have a really, really significant pain, and someone's like, "Oh yeah," right? And then it trivializes it. Right? It's a profound, important thing. Caitlin?
Well, then you've got stuff like going into the doctor's office where if you're in pain, you're told to rate it on a 1 to 10 scale, which is the most, subjective thing ever. Some people might stub a toe and be at, say they're at a 4.
Yeah.
And others might not even notice it. It's very weird how
Yeah. So subjective scales, right?
Yeah.
And then, I don't know. I share your view of that, and then you think about pain. I mean, I broke my collarbone a couple of years ago, and I had never I'm 42 years old, never broken a bone before, and or I was younger then, but anyway, I could not believe it. It really, really hurt, and you're just like, oh my God. Now I know what an 8 is, and the thing is, but then you think like people who've broken a lot of bones, maybe that would be like a 3. That the collarbone's not that painful an injury, where you think that like people different experiences, different kinds of views, like you say, can have different sorts of impacts. And then people who maybe have worked in a trauma center or want to work in medicine or whatever, and you're in an emergency room. Here comes another collarbone. Big whoop. That you get a different, depending on your relationship to the pain, right? You get different kinds of experiences. Yeah.
So one of the things with working out and the euphoria experience is that post physical stress, your brain releases a lot of dopamine, which is the reward hormone. So it can be very rewarding feeling, and it can also be in a way very addicting.
Yeah. So that there's also all the biochemical aspects of pain as well, right? Where this is then we move back toward that more objective body, right? Where it's not about your feeling. Like if you've ever worked really hard, say you were on the treadmill or whatever if you do exercise, whatever you do, right? And you feel like, God, I feel great afterwards or whatever. And you worked hard to get to that thing, or you ran a race, or you swam, or whatever you did, and you feel like I accomplished something that says, oh yeah, you're just addicted to dopamine, and good for you, big whoop, right? There's a sense of it takes it away from you, right? Because it's just some biochemical process that goes on for everyone, and it's not the individual, but that objective body out there, which can, on the other hand, that can be kind of freeing, oh yeah, well. If it's a bad pain, I don't need to feel that bad about that pain if it's a consequence of victimization. That's the consequence of these things, where you can kind of see it from different ways. And of course that comes back to how we make sense of the pain, which is what Scary is talking about and what we want to look at in the novel. Gabrielle, I think, and then Ben.
Oh no, I was just going to talk about the subjective things.
Okay.
Because sometimes when I get hurt, I feel like, oh Dad, I just I fell down a flight of stairs and it hurts really bad. Oh, don't do that. No, you don't understand.
Right, there's sort of trivializing. Where, of course, that's one of the ways that's a common response to pain, is a purposeful trivialization, right? Brush it off, get back up, get out there, whatever. Where it's don't feel the pain as a kind of self-mastery or minimization of the pain, right? Failing records. Ben.
So I was going to add on to the working out thing. So I guess emotion kind of hinders and hides pain. I don't know if you guys done legs, you just don't feel it right after you're done, and then literally 2 days later, it just hits you, you're walking, and you're just sore. At the time when you're working out, you just don't feel it, just because, I don't know, just emotions.
Maybe you're just a Superman. No, but like different kinds of experiences that involve different sorts of pain.
Back to pain being subjective, I almost wonder that if you know that people are going to judge your pain or how you handle yourself, or if you think that they're going to say, why don't make you feel if people are just they have to feel like they have to hide the fact that they're in pain, so they can't even just express it by seeing either, just kind of almost shameful.
Yeah, there's like intense emotions of self-awareness that are involved in pain, where it could be very profound to you, and yet then when others respond in a way that is doubtful, then it calls your own experience into question. Susan, you look like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I think in addition to the physical and emotional, you should add the social side.
Yeah.
I mean, like the rape case, for example. In some societies, when women are raped, they're brought to trial and criminally prosecuted for engaging in adultery. I mean, it adds to the
Right.
and society as a group imposes additional shame or whatever.
Right. So it's not just those attitudes toward pain, maybe dismissive attitudes toward pain, are not necessarily individual ones, but collectively held ones about what a legitimate kind of pain is and what an illegitimate kind of pain is. Jennifer?
Pain is universal, but that being said, everyone has different pain thresholds. And in the article, it says something about how pain in of itself is like a different language. Two different types of pain. Pain that you experience yourself and then pain that you hear about from other people. So it kind of just goes in collectively with what everyone's been saying about how you can't really understand someone else's pain, how a lot of people should realize it.
Yeah. So that, on the one hand, we all know what pain is, right? And on the other hand, it's a highly particular. That's a way of thematizing a lot of what we've been talking about. Where Scary actually says the same thing here, when she says that. So this is on page. Let's see, the first page in the reading 365. So for the person in pain, so incontestably, unnegotiably present, is it that having pain may come to be thought of as the most vibrant example of what it is to have certainty, right? To be sure of oneself. While for the other person, it's so elusive that hearing about pain may exist as a primary model of what it is to have doubt, right? That what for me is like, right here, this sucks, is for you like, oh, are you really having that pain? Well, there's just that, that's part of the problem of pain, right? So that both it's extremely present and extreme and certain, and yet at the same time doubtful and subject to all kinds of social and individual judgments. Caitlin and Christine?
One thing I was going to say is that culture kind of exerts a lot of control on how much you can express pain, like especially across things like age and gender lines. I mean, for instance, if you have a little kid and their feelings have been hurt or they've been hurt, no one's going to really think much of them just sobbing over it. But an adult is expected to control themselves when these sorts of things happen. Versus, and then men versus women, where women are generally allowed to be a little bit more expressive of the feelings, and men are more restricted on it.
Right. So gender, age, cultural background, there's all kinds of notions that are collectively held about how we experience pain and who's allowed to experience pain. Right? And of course part of that is then to say I'm in pain is make a claim on other people's attention. Right? And then that's where those social identities come into play. Christine?
Similar thing, it's two different kinds of pain, it's socially acceptable or expected pain, and then the divergent kind of masochist level of it. So you'll have like getting a medal for being wounded in the line of duty, or you'll get athletes that are like they're the best because they work the hardest, and put the most effort into hurting themselves to be this person. And there's two large spectrums of it that I think any person can fall inside of.
And those are sort of what's the spectrum? Okay. Okay, so socially acceptable, even valorized. Right here we have tomorrow, the Olympics starting, right? And we recognize people for their achievement in sort of being masochistic, right? To suffer and deprive themselves and endure a lot of physical pain, even in competition, right? Whether it's through physical hard knocks, falling on the ice, or the snowboarders or skiers or whatever who could like face extreme, physical suffering if they were to lose control on some of these runs that they do, right, or the bobsled or whatever, and then so that's socially acceptable, but we can think of all kinds of examples where the pain, taking risks. For example, if you get in some car accident because you're driving too fast, you like the speed. It's okay for the bobsled to like the speed in this sort of sanctioned kind of event. But if you're driving down the road too fast because you like the accident, there could be a lot of negative attitudes toward that pain that change the experience of the pain. So again, these in a way, what we're talking about is another argument along the lines of what Caitlin just pointed out too, that the emotional status of the pain impacts the pain, and also identities. The identity of the sufferer is very important, whether that's the athlete or the juvenile delinquent, right? Cameron.
Well, just in regards to that, it's socially acceptable to use pain as punishment.
Well, yeah, there's another thing right here, and here we have that's very central in the novel, right? Pain is instrumental. And Scary actually, if you remember from the reading, talks about torture at the end of it, pain and interrogation, right, where that we impose pain both like there's various kinds of punishment that impose pain, right? Whether it's emotional or physical, right? I'm going to deprive you of pleasure as a means of getting home to you that you cannot do that, right? Or, different kinds of imposition of physical pain, sanctioning people off from society, or whether like some kind of punishment of a child or whatever it might be, that it's like that's a legitimate way to, imposing pain is a legitimate way to get some sort of result, right? And that's what this novel is about, right? Imposing physical pain in some ways. I mean, we can ask, like, that's one of the things I was thinking we could talk about. What's the point of the pain? What's the point of the pain? Because there's a lot to go around. There's right? That certainly that those kinds of voluntary pain, whether they're rituals or rites or sorts of participation in various kinds of events, but also in other places. Of course, the problem with that is that then there's lots of pain that doesn't involve choices, right? And then and so when is it a choice and when is it not a choice? And again, then these questions of identities and so forth come back. Yeah, Kate.
One of the things that comes up too is pain, at least just in terms of things like even reality television, kind of proves that pain can be entertainment for people. I mean, as long as it doesn't cross certain boundaries, people are totally willing to just laugh at people falling over on their faces on the kind of massive.
Think of Jackass, right?
Yeah.
Things like that, where like extraordinary physical suffering. That people can put themselves under. And we're like, look at that, whatever. I mean, it becomes commodified, right? To suffer pain or to have a certain kind of attitude toward pain becomes funny. Right? Anyway, I think that we've talked around this, and Scary's basic point here, right, is that we can't really represent pain. It's at the one hand, as Jennifer pointed out, it's universal. There's these, we all know what pain is. We can all think of experiences of pain. And at the other hand, it's tremendously subjective. That you can't compare pain, and it's hard to represent pain to others. And then, so as she points out, that raises this issue of it's the certainty of it. I know what I'm feeling right now. It really hurts. Versus the doubt of it. Does that person understand me? Are they, or do I understand that other person? Where there's that kind of doubtful aspect. And the two are intertwined in a way that make pain always a very kind of complicated thing to talk about. And of course, when we get to the novel, that's the seam that it tries to work, right? That on the one hand, it's riveting and we pay attention to it, and on the other hand, it raises these questions about who can experience pain, how can they experience it, is it legitimate, and so forth. So let's take a break here, and then we'll turn in the second part to talk a little bit more about some episodes and examples from the novel.